The train rattled into Colorado Springs on a crisp autumn day in 1901, dust swirling around the platform as Frederick Mackay stepped off, clutching a leather satchel stuffed with dental tools and ambition. At 27, he was a skinny man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, fresh from dental school in Pennsylvania, eager to carve out a practice in this booming mountain town. The air smelled of pine and promise, but it wasn't the scenery that caught him first, it was the smiles. Or rather, the lack of them. At the general store, a clerk flashed teeth mottled with brown streaks, like coffee stains on porcelain. At the barber shop, a grizzled miner grinned, revealing the same odd pattern. By week's end, Mackay had seen dozens of mouths, each marked by what locals called Colorado brown stain. It wasn't rot. His probes found enamel hard as granite, resisting decay in a way he'd never witnessed. "What's in this place?" he muttered, scribbling notes by lamplight in his rented room above the saloon. Mackay wasn't one for idle puzzles. Back east, he'd aced anatomy by dissecting extra cadavers after hours. Here, he'd cracked this mystery too. He started asking questions, quietly at first, over mugs of weak beer or during checkups. "Always been this way," said Mrs. Hargrove, a schoolteacher with stained incisors, as he peered into her mouth. "My pa had it, his pa too. Town quirk, I reckon." But quirks didn't explain why her cavities were near non-existent, while his Philadelphia patients lost teeth by 30. He wrote letters, dozens of them, to dental colleagues, universities, anyone who'd listen. "Have you seen this?" he'd plead, describing the stains and the strange resilience. Most ignored him. A few replied with polite dismissal. "Mountain oddity," one sniffed. "Focus on fillings, Fred." By 1908, frustration weighed, but so did a hunch, the water. Colorado Springs sat at the foot of Pikes Peak, its streams tumbling through rocks older than time. Could something in those currents be painting teeth and protecting them? Mackay teamed up with a local dentist, Isaac Burton, who'd noticed the same pattern in nearby towns like Manitou Springs. They pooled cash, bought a crude microscope, and started testing, boiling water samples, eyeing sediment through smudged lenses. Nothing conclusive, just grit and guesswork. "It's in there," Mackay insisted, tapping a vial from the town well. "Something we can't see yet." Burton shrugged. "Or it's the air. Or the altitude. You're chasing ghosts." The ghosts kept calling. Mackay broadened his search, riding rickety wagons to Pueblo and beyond, finding the stain wherever certain springs flowed. By 1916, he'd mapped a rough patchwork. Some towns had it, others didn't. A letter to the American Dental Association begged for funds. They sent a curt no. He was a lone voice, a speck against the Rockies, until 1931 when a telegram rattled his desk, Alcoa interested. Sending chemists. Stand by. The Aluminum Company of America wasn't chasing teeth. They wanted fluoride for their smelting vats, locked in cryolite from Greenland's icy mines. But their labs had tools Mackay could only dream of, and Colorado's rocks piqued their curiosity. That summer, 2 men in crisp suits arrived, hauling spectrometers and glassware. They sampled the well at Broadmoor Hotel, where stained teeth waiters served Eastern tourists, and ran tests Mackay couldn't fathom. Days later, they sat him down in a smoky parlor. "Fluoride," the lead chemist said, tapping a report. 2 to 13 parts per million, depending on the source. Comes from the Pikes Peak cryolite, fluorine-rich, leaches into the water. Mackay blinked. Fluoride? He'd heard of it, a trace element slippery and obscure. The numbers danced. 2 to 13.7 milligrams per liter, far above what trickled through most rivers. "Explains the stains," the chemist added. "Too much scars the enamel as it forms. Kids get it worst." Mackay leaned forward, pulse quickening. "And the decay? Why don't they rot?" The chemist shrugged. "Dunno. Hardens the teeth, maybe. You're the dentist, figure it out." They packed up, leaving him the report and a seed of something bigger. That night, he paced his room, mind ablaze. Fluoride wasn't just a flaw, it was a shield. Too much marred smiles, sure. But what if you dialed it back? Controlled it? He scribbled a new letter, this time to the U.S. Public Health Service. Found fluoride in Colorado water. High doses stain, but prevent decay. Need study, can we use this? The reply took months, a tepid under review. Mackay didn't care. He'd cracked the mystery, or part of it. The brown stain wasn't a curse, it was a clue. As dawn broke over the peaks, he stared at the well outside, its ripples glinting. "If it's in the water," he whispered, "maybe it should be." H. Trenley Dean hunched over a cluttered desk in Washington, D.C., the summer of 1931 thick with humidity and promise. At 40, he was a public health service officer with a boxer's jaw and a bookkeeper's precision, his office a chaos of maps and tooth charts. A letter from Colorado had landed weeks earlier. Frederick Mackay's scrawl about fluoride, stains, and decay. Need study, it begged. Dean snorted. Need data, he muttered, shoving it aside. But the idea stuck, a splinter in his mind. Mackay wasn't wrong. Something was afoot. Dean had seen mottled teeth himself. Years back in Idaho, kids with enamel like speckled eggshells. Dentists called it a curiosity. He saw a pattern. If fluoride did this, scarred at high doses, shielded at low, there was a line defined, a threshold. He tapped a pencil, then rang up Elias Elvove, a NIH chemist with a knack for the impossible. Can you measure fluoride down to 1/10 of a part? Dean asked. Elvove, voice dry as chalk, said, Give me a month. By fall, Elvove delivered. A method using distillation and titration, precise to 0.1 parts per million. Dean grinned, clapping the man's bony shoulder. We're hunting now. In 1932, he hit the road, a one-man crusade with a suitcase of glass vials and a PHS badge. From Texas dust bowls to Ohio mill towns, he sampled wells and quizzed dentists, plotting fluoride levels against cavity counts. Bauxite, Arkansas ran hot, for ppm, teeth pitted but tough. Galesburg, Illinois, hovered at 1.8 ppm, stains faint, decay scarce. The numbers whispered. Less fluoride, less damage, same protection. By 1938, Dean had a hunch. 1.0 ppm was the sweet spot. No ugly fluorosis for most, yet cavities dropped. He published in public health reports, dry as dirt but electric to him. Fluoride at 1 part per million may prevent caries without harm. Colleagues nodded, skeptics scoffed. Prove it, a Boston dentist shot back at a conference. Dean's jaw tightened. Proof meant control. Tweak the water, watch the teeth. But who'd gamble their town on a theory? World War II lit the fuse. In 1942, Dean sat in a briefing, sweat beading as a general barked stats. 1 in 5 draftees rejected, jaws rotted out. National security, the man growled. Fix it. Dean saw his shot. Fluoride wasn't just dental trivia. It was a weapon against decay. He pitched the public health service. Pick a city, dose the water, track the kids. After months of memos, Grand Rapids, Michigan bit. A factory town of 160,000, it had low natural fluoride, 0.2 ppm, and a council itching to look progressive. The debate hit City Hall, January 1944. Dean stood in a packed chamber, tie crooked, facing a sea of wary faces. 1 part per million, he said, voice steady. Based on 10 years' data, cuts decay, no stains worth a damn. A grocer stood, arms crossed. You're doping our kids? Dean held up a chart, bauxite's mottled mess versus Galesburg's clean slate. Too much does that. We're not bauxite. A mother clutched her son, muttering about government meddling. The vote teetered, 5-4 yes. Dean exhaled. January 25, 1945, the mayor said. We start. The setup was a beast. Engineers rigged pumps at the water plant, sodium fluoride sacks stacked like sandbags. The Surgeon General greenlit a 15-year study. 30,000 school kids, teeth checked yearly, Muskegon as the undosed control. Dean roped in the National Institute of Dental Research, newly minted in '48 under Truman, to oversee it. Biggest dental experiment in history, he told Elvove, who just grunted. But doubt lingered. What if it flopped? Or worse, hurt someone? January 25th dawned cold, snow dusting Grand Rapids smokestacks. At 8 a.m., Dean watched a technician crank a valve, fluoride trickling into the mains. A crowd gathered, some cheered, some glared. A priest blessed the pipes, a picketer waved a sign. Poisoned by progress. Dean ignored them, sipping tap water from a tin cup. Tasted the same, maybe a faint bite. Here we go, he said to no one. Months turned to years. By 1946, dentists mailed early reports. First graders' baby teeth looked solid. Dean pored over x-rays in D.C., squinting at enamel lines. Too soon, he cautioned, but hope flickered. Kids born post, 45 were the real test, permanent teeth forming under fluoride's watch. At home, he'd catch his wife, Ruth, staring. You sure about this, Trenley? She'd ask. He'd nod, but nights brought dreams of stained grins and angry mobs. Across town, a boy named Tommy Hagen, 6 and 45, hated the fuss. Dentist again, he whined as his ma dragged him to checkups. His teeth gleamed, white, smooth, no brown. His ma, a seamstress, shrugged. Maybe it works. Tommy didn't care. He just wanted candy. But Dean cared, tallying every molar like a general counting troops. The war on decay was on, and Grand Rapids was the front line. In D.C., whispers grew. If it worked, every city'd want in. If it didn't, or if fluorosis crept up, Dean's career was ash. He lit a cigarette, staring at a map dotted with test towns. McKay's ghost hovered, those Colorado stains, the first clue. You saw it, Dean murmured. Now I'll prove it. The valve was open, the clock was ticking. The Florida sun beat down on Polk County in the summer of 1948, a haze of dust and heat rising from the phosphate mines. Jimmy Rawls, a foreman with a cigarette dangling from his lip, squinted at the towering dragline clawing into the earth. Phosphate rock, gray, jagged, packed with phosphorus, was the lifeblood here, feeding fertilizer plants that kept America's crops green. But it wasn't the rock that had Jimmy scratching his head today. It was the gas. Damn stuff's everywhere, he grumbled, waving at the haze spewing from the processing shed. Silicon tetrafluoride, the chemists called it, a sharp, choking byproduct of mixing sulfuric acid with the rock to make phosphoric acid. For years, it had drifted off, souring the air and the tempers of nearby farmers. Then the scrubbers came, big, wet towers that trapped the gas, turning it into a murky liquid, fluorosilicic acid. Waste, Jimmy'd called it, until the suits showed up. They rolled in from Tampa, ties loosened, briefcases stuffed with papers. Heard of Grand Rapids? One asked, a slick-haired man from IMC, the phosphate giant. Jimmy shrugged. Michigan, right? Cars. The man grinned. Teeth. They're dosing water with fluoride, cuts cavities. Your runoff's the ticket. Jimmy blinked, ash dropping from his cig. The acid they'd been flushing into holding ponds was suddenly gold? How's that work? He asked. The suit tapped a clipboard. Fluoride's in it, same stuff in the rock. Cities'll pay. It wasn't just IMC sniffing around. Up north, Alcoa, the aluminum titan, had its fingers in the game. Back in '31, their chemists had cracked McKay's Colorado riddle, pinning fluoride in the water. Now, with fluorine know-how from smelting cryolite for aluminum, they saw a side hustle. Phosphate rock held 3 to 4% fluoride naturally. Processing it released a flood, millions of pounds yearly. Alcoa's labs tweaked the scrubbers, purified the acid, and by 1947, they were shipping barrels to test markets. From pollution to prevention, a plant manager boasted at a bar, clinking glasses with Jimmy. Funny how that works. Funny, sure, but convenient as hell. The Public Health Service's 1950 nod to fluoridation lit a match. Grand Rapids was humming. Early reports showed kids' teeth holding strong, and cities clamored for a piece. Water plants couldn't use raw fluoride minerals. Too pricey, too slow. But fluorosilicic acid? Cheap, liquid, ready to pump. Florida's mines churned out over 20% of the world's phosphate, and the waste piled up, until it didn't. By '51, trucks rumbled out daily, hauling it to places like Fort Wayne and Indianapolis, where valves opened and taps flowed with 1.0 ppm. Jimmy watched it unfold, a mix of pride and unease. He'd seen the process, rock crushed, acid brewed, gas trapped. The final stuff was clear, sharp-smelling, tested to meet specs. But traces lingered, arsenic, lead, specks of heavy metals from the ore. Parts per billion, the IMC man swore, flashing a safety sheet. Dilutes to nothing in the pipes. Jimmy nodded, but at night, over whiskey with the crew, he wondered. We're drinking this now, a loader asked, squinting at his glass. Jimmy shrugged. Docs say it's fine. Not everyone bought it. In Grand Rapids, a mechanic named Earl Potts caught wind of the source. He'd fixed pumps at the water plant, seen the barrels stamped phosphate byproduct. Waste, he spat, slamming a wrench on his workbench. They're pouring factory runoff in our kids' milk. He cornered a city clerk at a diner, jabbing a finger. Who's making money off this? The clerk stammered, IMC, Alcoa, a dozen others. Earl stormed off, scribbling a flyer. Fluoride, health or hustle? By '52, he'd rallied a handful of neighbors, their voices drowned by the PHS's drumbeat of safe and effective. The industry didn't blink. At a Tampa office, an Alcoa exec leaned back, feet on a desk piled with orders. They'll get over it, he told a junior, puffing a cigar. Dentists love it, feds love it, cheaper than fixing teeth later. The numbers backed him. A ton of fluorosilicic acid cost pennies to produce, sold for dollars, and saved cities millions in dental bills. Phosphate plants turned a disposal headache into a revenue stream, and Alcoa's chemical arm cashed in, bridging aluminum and fertilizer worlds with fluoride as the glue. Back in Florida, Jimmy climbed a catwalk, peering into a scrubber tank. The acid gurgled, a faint green tinge under the lights. He'd heard the pitch, how Dean's trials proved fluoride worked, how the CDC called it a miracle. But the convenience weighed on him. Started as trash, he muttered, flicking his butt into the wind. Now it's in every sink. A kid from town, barely 10, peddled by below, grinning with clean teeth. Jimmy squinted. Maybe it was fine, maybe. Earl Potts didn't think so. Late one night, he dug through library stacks, finding a 1930s report on phosphate waste. Fluoride levels spiking in rivers before the scrubbers. They knew, he growled, underlining stats. He mailed a copy to a Detroit paper, but it landed in the trash. Editors waved it off as crank talk. Still, the seed was planted. In barrooms and church basements, whispers grew. Industrial slop in our water? Who signed off? In D.C., Dean got wind of the grumbles. Byproduct's a dirty word, he told an aide, pacing his NIDR office. Doesn't change the science. He'd fought for Grand Rapids, not this. Fluoride was fluoride, source be damned. But the optics stung. Industry's gain shadowed his triumph, and skeptics like Earl smelled a rat. Dean lit a cigarette, staring at a photo of Michigan kids, their smiles bright. They'll see, he said, smoke curling. It's about the teeth. Jimmy wasn't so sure. Driving home, he passed a billboard, fluoridation. Healthy smiles ahead. And snorted. The mines hummed behind him, pumps churning out acid for a thirsty nation. Convenient, yeah. Too convenient, maybe. H. Trenley Dean stood in his NIDR office in Bethesda, Maryland, on a crisp morning in 1956, a stack of reports teetering on his desk. 11 years since Grand Rapids flipped the fluoride switch, and the numbers sang. Kids born after 45 had 60% less tooth decay, molars smooth, incisors intact. He traced a graph with a calloused finger, Grand Rapids soaring past Muskegon's cavity-riddled control group. We did it, he murmured, a rare smile cracking his stern face. The 15-year study wasn't even done, but the Surgeon General didn't care, neither did Dean. The proof was in. He'd barely hung up from briefing the press when the phone rang again. Fort Wayne wanted in. Then Indianapolis. By 1951, 5 years into the trial, cities had jumped the gun, pumps humming with fluorosilicic acid from Florida's mines. The Public Health Service's 1950 blessing had cracked the dam. Now it burst. Dean, NIDR's new director, scribbled notes as calls flooded. How much? How fast? Aides scrambled, shipping guidelines. 1.0 ppm, no more, no less. Equity, he told a reporter, voice hoarse. Poor kids get the same shot as the rich. In Grand Rapids, Tommy Hagen, now 17, barely noticed. His teeth gleamed. Dentists cooed over them at checkups, but he cared more about his Chevy's carburetor than fluoride. His ma, though, beamed. Used to yank baby teeth with pliers, she'd say, nodding at the tap. Not anymore. Across town, school nurses tallied smiles, charts mirroring Dean's. The CDC took notice. By 59, they'd call fluoridation a top 10 public health win. A cheap fix at pennies per head. But not everyone clapped. Earl Potts, the mechanic who'd sniffed out the phosphate link, paced his garage in 56, oil-stained hands clutching a mimeographed pamphlet. 60%, he spat, glaring at a radio touting Dean's stats. What's it doing to their heads? He'd dug deeper since 52. Library stacks yielding scraps on fluoride waste, Cold War headlines stoking his fire. The Soviets loomed and whispers swirled. Fluoride dulled minds, softened resistance. Commie plot, a barber muttered over a trim, half joking. Earl didn't laugh. He wasn't alone. In Kansas, a housewife named Clara Boone saw her toddler's teeth speckle. White flecks, mild fluorosis. Safe, they said, she hissed, storming a council meeting with a jar of tap water. This ain't safe. Dentists shrugged. 23% of kids had it, they admitted, mostly cosmetic. Clara didn't buy it. Who's paying for this junk? She demanded. The clerk stammered. IMC Alcoa Industry. Her eyes narrowed. Figures. The backlash brewed slow but steady. By 57, flyers like Earl's peppered barrooms, fluoride, health or hustle, morphed into poison from the pipes. Cold War paranoia fed it. Movies like Dr. Strangelove would later mock the bodily fluids panic, but roots ran deep. A preacher in Ohio thundered, "Government's doping us." His flock nodded, eyeing their sinks. Others pointed to the source, fertilizer runoff, factory barrels. "They're dumping waste in our kids," a Detroit machinist growled, waving a union rag. Dean fought back. At a 58 conference, he faced a packed hall, sweat beading under lights. "Fluoride's fluoride," he snapped, slamming a fist on data, Grand Rapids X-rays, cavity stats. "Source doesn't change chemistry." A heckler shouted, "What about the stains?" Dean held up a photo, mild fluorosis, barely a mark. "Price of progress." Beats pulling teeth. The room split, half cheered, half jeered. He left rattled, lighting a cigarette outside. "They don't get it," he told an aide. "It's for them." Industry shrugged off the noise. In Tampa, the Alcoa exec from 51 sipped bourbon, scanning orders. "They'll settle," he said, smirking at a junior. "Dentists'll drown him out." The American Dental Association doubled down. Ads with gleaming smiles, kids chomping apples. "Fluoridation works," billboards sprouted, drowning Earl's flyers. Phosphate plants hummed, trucks rolling north, profits ticking up. "Waste to wealth," the exec chuckled. "Best trick we pulled." But the cracks widened. In Grand Rapids, a school board meeting turned ugly. Parents like Clara waved photos of speckled teeth, shouting down a PHS rep. "You're experimenting on us," one yelled. The rep, a nervous suit, cited Dean's 60%, they booed. Earl drove up from downstate, passing out his latest. "Who's cashing in?" He'd tracked the chain. IMC to Alcoa to city contracts. "Follow the money," he told a crowd, voice raw. A few nodded, most shrugged. "Teeth look fine," a dad muttered, sipping coffee. Dean felt the heat. In 59, he sat with NIDR brass, maps showing fluoridation's spread. Half the U.S. by decade's end. "They're scared," an aide said, nodding at protest clippings. Dean stubbed out a smoke. "They're wrong." He'd seen the before, kids with mouths like war zones. And the after. But the waste tag stuck, a burr he couldn't shake. "Should have sold it better," he grumbled. Ruth, his wife, caught him staring at the ceiling that night. "Still sure, Trenley?" she asked. He nodded, but sleep didn't come. Across town, Tommy Hagen revved his Chevy, oblivious. His girlfriend, Sue, grinned beside him, teeth perfect, no stains. "Heard some nuts say this stuff's poison," she laughed, nodding at a water bottle. Tommy snorted. "Tastes fine to me." They peeled off, radio blaring Elvis, while Earl hunched over a typewriter, hammering out another plea. "They'll see," he muttered, echoing Dean's hope with a darker edge. In Florida, Jimmy Rawls watched a truck haul acid north, dust trailing. "Whole country's drinking it now," he told a loader, half proud, half wary. The convenience still itched. Waste turned savior overnight. Dean's triumph glowed, but shadows crept, fear, fluorosis factories. The valve was wide open, and the tension was just beginning. Lena Carter stood on a Portland sidewalk, March 30th, 2025, megaphone crackling as rain streaked her jacket. "No more fluoride," she shouted, a crowd of 50 nodding under umbrellas. At 32, she was a biochemist turned activist, her voice sharp from years dissecting studies. Portland never fluoridated. Voters shot it down in 2013. But Lena's fight was bigger now. "It's in your toothpaste, your soda, your kids' juice," she said, waving a stack of papers. "Why force it in our water, too?" The world had changed since Dean's triumph. Fluoride was everywhere, Colgate processed foods, even tea leaves soaking it up from soil. By 2015, the U.S. dialed water levels back to 0.7 ppm, admitting overexposure risked fluorosis in a saturated age. Lena clutched a 2019 JAMA pediatrics study. Pregnant women in fluoridated Canadian cities, their boys' IQs dipping 4.5 points per milligram of fluoride in urine. "Neurotoxin," she told the crowd, voice rising. "Not at Dean's dose, maybe, but why chance it?" In Bethesda, Dr. Janice Lane, a CDC epidemiologist, scrolled the same study on her laptop, brow furrowed. At 40, she'd inherited Dean's legacy. Decades of data showing a 25% cavity drop in fluoridated towns. "Still works," she muttered, sipping coffee. But the 2023 National Toxicology Program report unsettled her. High doses, above 1.5 ppm, might harm brains, it said, though 0.7 ppm was uncertain. Critics like Lena pounced, Janice sighed. "Correlation's not causation," she told a colleague. But they don't hear that. The pushback wasn't new. Earl Potts' ghost lingered in every no-fluoride sign. But it had grown teeth. Juneau, Alaska, Ditched it in 2007, dozens followed. In 2023, a California lawsuit, Food and Water Watch versus EPA, challenged fluoridation safety, citing the NTP. Lena joined rallies there, brandishing the phosphate link. Fertilizer waste, she'd say, echoing Jimmy Rawls' unease. Traces of arsenic, lead. Safe doesn't mean zero. The feds held firm. NSF standards kept contaminants to parts per billion, but trust was ash post-COVID. Tommy Hagen, now 66, watched it unfold from Grand Rapids, retired and gray. His teeth still held, no cavities, a fluoride kid through and through. Worked for me, he told Sue, now his wife, over breakfast. She nodded, but their grandson, Ethan, 10, had white flecks, mild fluorosis from too much toothpaste as a tot. They're mad about it now, Sue said, flipping past a news clip of Lena's rally. Tommy shrugged. Folks always find something. Janice felt the heat at a DC briefing. Low-income kids need this, she argued, stats flashing. Cavities hit the poor hardest without it. A senator leaned in. And the brain stuff? Janice hedged. No proof at our levels. But doubt crept. She'd read Choi's 2012 meta-analysis, high fluoride villages in China, IQS down 7 points. Not here, she told herself. US doses were a fraction. Still, she ordered a review quietly. Lena didn't wait. In Portland, she met Clara Boone's granddaughter, Mia, now 40, who'd inherited the fight. Gran saw it coming, Mia said, showing a faded photo of speckled teeth. They dug into history, Alcoa's profits, Dean's blind spots. Convenience, Lena spat. Waste they couldn't dump, so they sold it. Mia nodded. And we drank it. Their petition hit city halls nationwide. Opt out, let people choose. Bodily autonomy, Lena told a podcast voice steel. Not mass medication. In Florida, Jimmy Rawls' son, Ray, 58, ran the old phosphate plant, pumped still churning fluorosilicic acid. Same game, he told a crew watching barrels load. Demand dipped. Some cities switched to sodium fluoride, pricier but cleaner. But most stuck with the cheap stuff. Ray saw Lena's clips online, her waist jabs stinging. Ain't wrong, he admitted to his wife, laid over beers. Started as runoff. She frowned. Still safe. He paused. They say so. Janice wrestled too. At a diner, she met a young dentist, Sam, who'd seen both sides, fluoride's wins, fluorosis's rise. Kids swallow toothpaste now, he said, stirring tea. Add water, and it's overkill for some. Janice nodded, scribbling. Did we solve decay just to spark this? She asked. Sam shrugged. Maybe. She stared at her cup, tap water glinting. Dean's ghost hovered, 60% in 56, a health revolution. Now, a reckoning. Lena's rally ended, rain easing. We're winning, she told Mia, hoarse but fired up. A text pinged. Another town voted no. She smiled, but her daughter, 6, tugged her sleeve. Is water bad, Mommy? Lena knelt, softening. Not bad, just too much of a good thing. The kid grinned, teeth white, a faint speckle. Lena's jaw tightened. We'll fix it. In Grand Rapids, Tommy flipped off the TV, another fluoride debate. Round and round, he muttered. Sue laughed. Like us in 59. He nodded, sipping water. Tasted fine, always had. But outside, a no fluoride sign sprouted, Earl's echo alive. Janice filed her review that night, March 30th, 2025, recommending more study. 0.7 ppm held for now. Legacy's worth it, she wrote, then paused. Isn't it? In Portland, Lena typed a new flyer. In Florida, Ray watched a truck roll out. The valve stayed open, but the tug-of-war raged. Health versus doubt, past versus present, convenience versus choice.